Good morning and good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. Thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate all of you spending part of your busy days with us. We're just about ready to get started here on the webcast. We're going to let a few more people trickle in. So we have a poll question that you should see on your screen for you to answer. Please take a few seconds to provide your response, and we will get started here really shortly. All right, well, thanks again for joining us. Now, before I pass it over to our presenters, we do have a few housekeeping items that I will run through here. First, you'll see that you have multiple engagement tools on your webcast dashboard. These tools are resizable, they're movable, so feel free to move them around to get the most out of your desktop space. You can also expand your live panel and slide area or maximize it to full screen by clicking on the arrows in the top right corner. If you have any questions throughout the webcast, which we encourage you to submit them through the Q&A engagement tool that's on your left, we'll open it up for questions toward the end of the webcast. Now, if you're experiencing any problems during the webcast, especially those related to audio or visuals, please let us know by using that questions module. You can also click on the Help Engagement tool that's at the bottom of your screen. Now, if you want to share the webcast with your friends and colleagues, which we encourage you to do, we are recording it and we'll send out a link to the on-demand version following the webcast. Lastly, if you would like to request a slide deck or any particular slides, just drop us a line at hello@resolve.io or send us a private question in that same questions panel. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speakers for today. First, it's my pleasure to introduce Mike Fuson with Excalibur Data Systems. Mike is a veteran of multiple ITSM toolsets. He has spent the past 20 plus years working with customers to leverage their toolsets to improve their processes. He has been working with Cherwell Service Management since its very early days on the market. He's a Cherwell consultant and instructor, and he possesses every certification Cherwell software has available, and even a few he has made up. When he isn't working with customers to make the Cherwell Service Management do wild and crazy things, he is coming up with his next idea to make Cherwell Service Management do wild and crazy things. And when Mike isn't thinking about Cherwell, you will find him camping, rock climbing, or scuba diving with his family and the scouts from his Boy Scout troop and council. Now, we also have Marcus Rebelo joining us from Resolve. Marcus serves as the Director of Sales Engineering and Product Management at Resolve, where he works with the Fortune 1000 leading telcos and global MSPs to design and implement creative IT automation solutions. With more than 2 decades of experience in networking, software, and hardware technologies, Marcus has a deep expertise designing and architecting IT solutions that create strong foundations for innovation. Marcus has held positions ranging from the service desk to complex service development across a wide range of organizations, including NTT Communications, IPsoft, BMC Software, Wipro, and Hewlett-Packard. And with that, I will pass it right on over to our presenters.
Great. Thank you so much. So as I was introduced, I'm Mike Fuson from Excalibur Data Systems. Excalibur is a specialized consulting firm working with customers and their ITSM platforms and ancillary solutions to help them get the most out of their ITSM platform. We're very excited to be presenting with our partner Resolve today and sharing with you kind of the continuation of our CMDB series on what more can we be doing with the CMDB and how do we end this saga. So Mike, Marcus, and I are going to have quite a bit of fun with you guys today and sharing a lot of insights and a little bit about Resolve insights and the things that it can do to help you. So we do have our poll results. And Marcus, what do you think? Is this about what we expected to see?
Let's see here. Yeah, I haven't seen it yet. There we go. How confident are you in your CMDB's accuracy? Somewhat confident. Well, I think that's probably a good middle of the road. I wonder how many people that say they're somewhat confident, where that somewhat kind of sits, if it's on the lower end or the higher end. Not confident at all is pretty much expected, as you and I have talked about before, with folks really understanding what's in their CMDB and leveraging that accuracy across the board in their systems. Very confident is very interesting. I see 10% of you say very, very confident. So would love to maybe chat with you at the end of this and understand why you're confident, or maybe some of the things we're going to talk about lead to that and you've already done them. So.
Absolutely. And Marcus and I have had a bunch of great conversations of the CMDB. The CMDB is so important because it's really the cornerstone, or for so many of successful customers, it's the center of the universe to being able to deliver good experiences to their customers and to have successful IT operations. So a well-maintained and accurate CMDB will provide a lot of clarity. So it gives you not only the complete inventory of available resources, but if we're doing some discovery mapping or dependency mapping, we're able also to see what is running on many of those resources. In addition, where are those resources located? How are those resources connected to one another? How are those resources there to support the business? This becomes a key cornerstone to so many effective IT operations, is understanding what the impact of a CI having a problem does to delivering services to the business. How much are those resources costing us, especially when you start talking about downtime and outage costs? How secure are those resources? So are they where we need them to be? How are those resources being utilized? So do we have resources that are underutilized or resources potentially that are being overutilized? How changes will impact critical applications and infrastructure, and potentially the budget. And we're going to talk a bit about how the CMDB plays such a central role in effective change management. And how can you more quickly resolve problems and or incidents as it relates to things that come up within the environment by having an effective CMDB and understanding what those impacts truly are. Marcus, you have any other thoughts on this being the cornerstone to everything?
Yeah, I think the color I could add to this is when we've all come in on a Monday morning and something's not working, but nobody changed anything over the weekend. That kind of ties to the cornerstone approach of understanding what's connected, where it's at, who it affects, really the change control, the cost. Now the business is down. So I think that Monday morning of coming in and seeing something not working helps to work its way backwards to eventually the cornerstone of supporting all of those changes.
Absolutely. So we're going to slide into a brief history of the CMDB. And Marcus has put together something really exciting for you guys. It's really amazing to see how the CMDB has progressed. So Marcus, I'm going to turn it over to you, and we'll share this great brief history of the CMDB.
Great. Thanks, Mike. I actually had to go do a little bit of research, not necessarily on the history of the CMDB since I lived through it, but how I could make this a little bit more interesting to everybody. So I've tried to put in some absolutely worthless trivia information to help tie it all together for you. So in the 1980s, it was the dawn of personal computers. We used floppy disks for storage, and we began video game adoption. I spent a lot of quarters on a lot of different machines. E.T. was the highest grossing movie, and Olivia Newton-John's Let's Get Physical was on the top of the charts for the entire decade. ITIL was introduced, and later in that decade, the concept of a CMDB, related really for change control to an asset, was started. So kind of moving on to the 90s, okay, so we got those personal computers we got in the 80s now connected to things. We got mobile phones. Titanic was the top movie of the decade. Macarena was displaced by Mariah Carey and Boyz II Men's One Sweet Day, which I've never heard in my life. But we moved into the era of asset management. And in that era, what we were focused on was really about inventory. And it was specific inventory. It was the inventory that was going to be tied to things that weren't cheap. We wanted to know where expensive things were so that we could depreciate them. And virtualization was at its infancy, and that's a little different than we know it today. It was really more around LPARs and difficult items to track like software. So those are the things that we started to focus on as we started to build those containers of information. In the 2000s, from a technology point of view, we got the iPod, we got the iPhone, YouTube, Blu-ray, Facebook, and Twitter. If we go back in time and change a few things. Dark Knight made the most money, and again, Mariah Carey, we belong together. Go figure. CMDB perspective-wise, configuration management is now becoming the thing to take on all the assets. We went from cost-effective or cost-controlled assets to now even cost-effective assets being included. And everyone was struggling to define what a CI was. We began the relationship mapping, but only for upstream and downstream, the north and south relationships. The three-tier stack was the popularized piece of software or business software components that were being leveraged at the time. And change control is adopted as the CIs began moving the CMDB to an elevated status as a true CMDB. The business was using all the technology, and it was forcing IT to look at it through their eyes. Moving into the 2010s, the new tech, iPad, Raspberry Pis, AI going mainstream, 4G, and virtual reality. Avatar was the movie. Uptown Funk was the song. From a CMDB perspective, it was a front row. CMDB took on the design and the definition that could be of what could be put in there and what should or shouldn't be and what can and can't be from just a feasibility perspective. The realization that the up and down, the north-south was just not enough. Relationships were also developed to the left and right or the east-west, and those were things that weren't being captured. If they could be at all, they were being done minimally. And that brings us to the bottom of the trough in this diagram. For those that aren't familiar with this chart, it is a Gartner chart that shows us where technologies are in their life cycle. And the bottom of this is really, they call it the trough of disillusionment. So the CMDB has hit its peak, and now we're at the bottom going, you know what? We've gone the path. We put everything in here. Now, what do? We can't put it all in here. We can't maintain it. How are we going to handle this? That takes us to the next decade of the 2020s. While it's still very early on, obviously, since it's the first or second half of this year and first year of the decade, most popular tech is 5G, UV sterilizers, go figure, smaller AirPods, and smaller drones. Most popular movies, Star Wars, Rise of Skywalker, and Cardigan by Taylor Swift takes the song. From a CMDB perspective, we have a resurgence, and this is cool, because the resurgence is due to the new technologies that have been developing over those past 10 years. And that allows us to adapt and address the problems of the past where we hit that trough of disillusionment. But we're going to get to that shortly. Now I'd like to turn it over to my colleague Mike for some insights around the CMDB.
Thank you, Marcus. Thank you for sharing. Whoops, got a little too fast on the slides there. So the CMDB struggle is real. Here's some quotes from, regarding the CMDB. I can think of at least 3 major customers, 2 in financial services and 1 in healthcare, that have taken multiple passes at it. As Marcus went through that history of the CMDB, I think for many of us, and the poll results kind of showed that, is we haven't figured out how to get it right yet. It's a challenge. It's not the same thing for every organization. There are differences in how organizations want to approach their CMDB. And one of the struggles you get is, how do we get the CMDB to be accurate? And how do we keep the CMDB accurate? Getting data into a database is easy. Keeping the data accurate is really where the challenge comes in. And then making sure that data is accurate, that accurate data is able to be used and leveraged by the organization to do the things that we need to do. And you see CMDB specialists at IBM. We have customers that started 10 years ago and are still trying to get it right. So for those of you that said, hey, our CMDB isn't perfect, you're right where everyone else is today. Marcus, you have any additional thoughts on the CMDB struggle?
I think you've covered it, Mike. It's real, it's there, and there's no silver bullet.
So let's dive into the good, the bad, and the ugly. We've seen it all. As a Cherwell partner, Excalibur works with customers on leveraging their ITSM platform, leveraging the CMDB within that platform to try to drive best practices. Try to align that with your ITIL best practices. Simple things like being able to track how many different incidents have happened on a particular device. Leveraging change management to say, what are all the devices that are part of this change and what are their impacts? Now, of course, the platform provides upstream and downstream relationships, but for so many customers, these are things that are manually maintained. And one of the things that I've said in my previous CMDB sessions is CMDB is much like a garden. You can plant everything and things start to grow and you've got these great looking tomatoes that are out there, but if you're not managing the weeds, weeds are bound to come into play. And that is what the real struggle is, and why it starts to get ugly is manually maintaining that CMDB is a very difficult thing to do. There are so many pieces that are out there, and we can put processes in place, but who's really making sure that that garden is appropriately tended? What are some of the other good, bad, and ugly that you may have seen, Marcus?
So I think it comes down to adoption by each of the companies. If they're all in, there tends to be a better outcome, although not perfect, if it's not pushed from the top down. Some of the other outcomes really in terms of, we always like to focus on the train wreck, right? Some of the ones that are still ongoing today, deployments that have been legacy ongoing, where you've actually had turnover from the head people running the projects. Why does that continue to go that way? And it's because of really not planning in advance and figuring out, like you said, the garden analogy. What am I going to plant? When am I going to plant it? What's the right thing to put in at the right time? So those are some of the bads, of course. The goods, a lot fewer of those. I did have the privilege of working for a company that did have a rating of a CMMI level 5, which was achieved completely manually. And I will tell you, there was an entire team of 60 plus people just to do that. So there's both sides of the spectrum. And I think now everybody's finding a happy medium somewhere with the extremes of doing it manually as well as the long-term failure.
So as we start to look at this, why is it so difficult to get the CMDB right? And we've kind of talked about a couple of those type of items. Teams don't trust the data, right? Because that data is usually out of date, incomplete, or could outright be inaccurate. Manual updates just don't keep up in today's dynamic IT environments, especially those with multiple deployments a day. You think about how rapidly so many of our organizations are spinning up and spinning down various systems. The cloud has certainly changed how we view and what we need to maintain within our CMDBs. Mapping dependencies by hand is super time consuming and also is just prone to human error. And understanding how many levels deep do we want to go, having that plan, even having a great plan, Marcus, as you just noted, a team of 60 people got it there. Well, most organizations don't, unfortunately, have a team of 60 people to be able to get their CMDB where they want it to be. The virtualized environments, and we've got containers and serverless architectures and all these different things that are now more difficult to track. It's no longer just physical servers. I mean, Marcus, you and I go back long enough that pretty much everything was a physical server, right? When you said, hey, server 1, 2, 3, 4, that was a physical box, usually sitting in a rack. And in today, these virtualized environments, and you look at something like in a VMware architecture, that may be on one set of physical devices one day and may be migrated to another set of physical devices the next. So where does that live? Because there's two components to that. There's the virtual server, and then there's also the physical devices that these things are sitting on. Hybrid, multi-cloud, multi-domain environments, you start to get into very large environments, it just becomes near impossible to track every single component and to do that super effectively. And then now we're starting to move into IoT. So that's all kinds of devices, many types, that are now part of the environment. One of the examples that I use, a number of our hospitals that we work with, healthcare systems, they may have a children's hospital as an example. And in that children's hospital, this is not to say that they don't do this in the regular hospitals, but in the children's hospitals, they may have these network connected devices. Think of things like Xboxes and PlayStations that are network connected. And we need to understand where those are, because those all of a sudden become an attack vector for the bad guys. And we need to know that they're out there. What are they? What do we need to do with them? What VLAN are they on? All these sort of details start to become information that we want to be able to track. And this starts to drive all of these challenges that are out there. Marcus, I'll take a breath and let you chime in a little bit on some of this as well.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Mike. Just a couple of quick things. You did such a great job covering, the high points, the medium points, and some of the fine details with, some of those traditional challenges. I think one of the big ones that I mentioned a little bit earlier comes back to executive sponsorship. Having that leadership and drive from the top down really helps to make CMDB projects and deployments successful. Ownership of the data. Understanding who owns it, whether it's IT, the business, who's going to be responsible for getting that data in there and maintaining it. And lastly, you touched on it already, Mike, the adoption of CMDB as a source. It's not just about getting the data in there, it's about getting people comfortable enough with it to leverage it and use it, rather than maintaining what happens today. And we see is a lot of their own either asset or content repositories, as well as spreadsheets to tell them what's where.
Absolutely. And then we've all been impacted by the new challenges from our friend coronavirus, COVID-19. So as we're all, so many of us are now working remotely, and all these things have changed. Who knows what's being pushed out? The IT governance and controls are more challenging than they were before, and becoming more important. Not that they weren't important before, but really have come to the forefront of importance. Data gaps are more glaring than ever. As you're trying to deal with the problem, you can't just go over to that person's desk who may have the answers. Maybe they're not answering you on Teams or Jabber or your chat platform, and you need to be able to figure out what's going on. New devices need to be tracked and managed. And everything seems to be a web application anymore. One of the examples I use with one of our customers that with COVID-19, that was something that kind of jumped out at them. And folks that have been to some of my other presentations have heard this analogy. They have the little Jabra speaker pucks. So you have your little speakerphone you can hook up to your laptop. And they had X number of these, and different folks would check them out from IT as they needed them, but they weren't being tracked within the CMDB. They didn't know who had these. All of a sudden, poof, the order comes down, everybody's working from home. So where are these devices now? They're only $300 a piece, but that starts to add up a little bit. And I think all of us recognize every organization has been paying very close attention to where our dollars are going and what we're spending on budget. So going and buying a few more of these isn't something that somebody just did with the wave of the hand anymore. And the CMDB could help. We don't need a ton of details on these particular devices, but knowing who has possession of them, where they're located, could make a difference, because you've got folks that maybe just don't really need it right now, but somebody else does, and being able to have that information starts to become very helpful. So as we start to look at this, we start to go beyond just the discovery of the devices, and we start talking about dependency mapping. So Marcus, I'd love to have you share with us what this looks like.
Great. Thanks, Mike. And thanks for that overview on what we're seeing with COVID as well out there. So what do we really mean by dependency mapping? It's really understanding that the topology is different than the dependencies. Topology gives you the infrastructure view, but mapping what the relationships are to the applications in addition to the infrastructure is really going a step further and giving you the information you need. Gives you the ability to show the interrelationships between all of the components. Gives you the visibility into things like change impact, incidents and outages, ops planning, and of course the business service impact. And we're used to looking at technology as technology. And when there are issues, we're looking at it with that viewpoint. That's the viewpoint most of us take. Having the viewpoint from the business and knowing what the business applications and services that are supported in question, and that's what provides the visibility that I think we need to have for today. And that all kind of comes together with understanding of the relationships, not only from the application and the infrastructure, but back to the business as well.
So we have a poll question for you. How are you handling dependency mapping today? We'll give everybody a moment to respond to this. So looking at our answers, not a lot of surprises here that I see. We don't map anything at all. We map dependencies manually, but we see, really no one on this call is actually using automated technology. So as we start to drive forward, we're going to be able to share with you the automated technology that's available and the really exciting things that it can do for you. So setting your CMDB vision and strategy, this becomes something very important for organizations. So Marcus, let's talk about this a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know, Mike, actually, you have a lot of experience on this front and have some ideas to share with us. But it comes back to what you've started off with already and making the CMDB there, as we're seeing in the diagram, the center of the universe. So I think maybe your experience could kick us off, and I'll do my best to add some color.
Absolutely. And so, when we start to see customers doing those, Marcus, you talked about a highly evolved customer. I see some of our highly evolved customers where they've made the CMDB the center of the universe. So not only can it help with incident response and root cause analysis as it relates to problem management, but looking at impacts, doing better change management, better governance, auditing and compliance, doing our cost analysis and our forecasting, resource utilization and optimization. How are these resources being used? Where are they sitting? Being able to map those services up, as you talked about, dependency mapping is not just tying the devices together, but understanding why they're tied together and what service that's providing to the business. Planning and planning to include cloud migrations. I know many of the customers on the phone today are either in the midst of or are planning for migrations of things that were traditionally on-premise to moving things into the cloud. Software and asset technology life cycles and planning, understanding how old some of these assets are, and improving your security posture. One of the examples that I use with one of our customers, they have a CMDB item type called applications. And they look at this as some of their large applications that may have sub-applications. They're a hospital system. So those of you in healthcare know all about the fun world of Epic or Cerner, those type of platforms, down to other key business applications. And one of the things that they've done, being still manually driven on that front, is having a process to make sure that those application owners are keeping those applications up to date. Who's responsible for them? Who owns them? What version is it on? That sort of detail, which helps to drive better decision-making, better processes within the organization. When you start to look at a platform like Cherwell Service Management, Cherwell has a great CMDB platform that's part of it, and we can feed a lot of great data into it. The CMDB ties into almost everything within the platform out of the box. You don't really have to do anything extreme to be able to tie it into your processes. But it's getting that view of the CMDB and being able to leverage the data from the CMDB to do the things that we want to be able to do. Other thoughts, Marcus, on the CMDB being the center of the universe?
I think one of the items also that I think you have a lot of experience that can maybe add to this is the strategy behind that. You've covered off the topics here on all of the things that make it the center, but how do you get there? Is it really just, I'm going to shove it all in there at once, or is it that garden analogy that you were providing earlier?
I think the most effective strategies to doing that, everything starts with the plan, right? Failing to plan is planning to fail, right? You have to have a plan on how you're going to drive to the CMDB. You can't just go out and say, oh, we've got all this data, let's just import it.
Right.
Well, now what are you going to do with it? So what's our strategy? And the strategy may come in waves. I know you're going to talk a little bit later on here about the different maturity models. And when you start out at kind of that base starting point, do we pull in our desktops and our laptops, our point devices that are out there, and get in our servers and start to grow our CMDB and have a strategy around it? That analogy I used of the customer that mapped their applications, that was done and planned very deliberately. They knew what their challenge was going to be, which is we can put the data in there. That was the big argument that happened when we were really designing that particular CI type. Well, this is all going to be great, but who's going to maintain it? Because this is something that is unique to us as an organization, is something that we want to drive, that we're going to derive data and value from. So what is our strategy to do this? And that's where they came up with they actually have a whole process built in where on a yearly basis, people are requested to update the data. Then if they don't go do it on their own, then they're nagged about doing it. Then they have the CMDB sheriffs come visit their desk and say, you need to make sure that you update this data. And that was deliberately and understood to be a manual process. We're not going to be able to buy a tool that's going to get all of that data. There's some data they can feed in from other places, but it was about having a strategy. How are we going to make this effective and make sure it continues to be effective for us as an organization? But that strategy is always, do you want to boil the ocean to start? And chances are, and I think, Marcus, you've probably seen this as much as I have, when you try to boil the ocean to start, that's where you start to run into a challenge. And then and then you're already set up, kind of trying to play catch up. If we have that deliberate strategy in moving into it, it's much more effective.
Awesome. Yeah, we definitely agree on that. Thanks, Mike. I think we have a poll question again here.
Yes, and you guys will want to make sure. So which CMDB use cases are most important to you? Select all that apply. And so you'll scroll down and you can check off as many boxes as you want. And we'll give you guys all here just a few moments to check a few boxes off, and then we'll look at the poll results, and we're going to move into some even more exciting content. All right, so let's take a look at our poll results. So impact analysis, change management and governance, auditing and compliance, services mapping, software asset, and technology lifecycle. All things that are important use cases, and definitely in line with much of what we're talking about today.
Yep, absolutely.
So many CMDBs have failed by having too much detailed data forced into them without a clear business purpose or maintenance plan. This is from Forrester, and that was what we were just talking about. Is you can just shove a bunch of data in there. If you don't have a plan of how you're going to leverage it and how you're going to use it, it makes it much more challenging for it to be effective. So a framework and an action plan. So Marcus, let's talk a little bit more about this. What would a framework and action plan for success look like?
Absolutely. Let's start off with a maturity model to understand what the definitions of success might look like. I'm sure most of you have seen this. It's really just saying, where are you in the maturity of your CMDB? And it's bottom up. So basic CMDB requirement all the way to deviations in service status, really being proactive and maintaining that and leveraging the technologies of today. So most of the folks we work with, most companies we engage with, are going to be somewhere at the 2, potentially to the 3 level, and starting to scratch at 4. The reality is, as you work your way up the maturity model, there are things that you have to implement to be successful. And those are kind of called out there to the right. Basics with discovery and CMDB importation, and then moving your way up to visualization, understanding your topology, mapping those applications, and then ultimately getting to that event correlation, because now you have the data to support that, as well as the analytics and AI associated to it. The actionable steps to get there are really going to be what we've been kind of talking about as a theme here today: documentation of those goals and the vision, understanding what you're going to use it for, how you plan to leverage it, and what those business needs that you're meeting with it are going to be. What are those goals? And then understanding the data strategy of how that all ties back together. How am I going to leverage it from the applications and services that are most important today, and setting up the infrastructure to support and capture that data so that I can re-leverage it, including things like owners and processes, and we talked about north and south, east and west relationships as well. Integration of the tools that are going to help you maintain it. You're not going to be able to do this manually unless you throw an inordinate amount of people at it. So really, it's going to be leveraging the tools and technologies that can help you do that discovery and dependency mapping, whether it's going to be a variety of them, whether it's going to be consolidation, whether it's going to be just leveraging what you have as a starting point. Get that data into the CMDB to ensure it's accurate and up to date. The last thing you want is a stagnant repository of a snapshot in time, because that won't help anybody with any of the things we're talking about to re-leverage that CMDB back to the future today. Keeping your eye on the prize. What is the prize? It's about being able to have the full holistic picture. It's knowing that the processes are deployed. It's knowing that you can validate everything throughout the life cycle. And lastly, we're talking about improvement. So it's never just, here it is, I'm done, I have the process documented, I have my application documented. As Mike pointed out, with the technologies that we're leveraging today, with more virtualization, more cloud infrastructure, more hybridization, more containerization, all of those things are moving and updating rapidly. So your application may be in one place today and another place tomorrow without anybody really understanding or needing to know that it is even moved. And then how are you going to define what that success looks like? What are your KPIs to say, I know how I'm going to grade myself to determine whether or not I'm successful. Without that definition, you're really just going through the motions of capturing the information and thinking you're doing something. So define what success looks like with those KPIs.
And Marcus, that becomes a very, very good roadmap to help customers help you plan that strategy as we're talking about. There's a method to really doing this and being effective. But how can new technologies help us succeed? I mean, you talked about not being able to, you got to have a ton of people if you want to do this manually, but there's technologies that can actually help us be very successful at our CMDB.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Mike. And that's what we're going to step into next, really taking a look at the Resolve Insights key capabilities as part of that product set. And it's going to be things like the agentless auto discovery. It's going to be things like the dynamic dependency mapping. So you may map it today, it may be different tomorrow. It's going to understand and dynamically remap it and provide that update to those CMDBs. Understanding the visualization of that infrastructure around the topology. Being able to monitor for performance. It's not just capturing it, it's also understanding it as a lead-in to the potential incidents events that are going to happen. Being able to bi-directionally handle those integrations, and then also handling it from an operational and business perspective with dashboards, allowing the visualization to be seen from a business perspective and operationally. So you're really looking at it from two different viewpoints. Being able to then take all of that data to leverage prediction capabilities for analytics, anomalies, and set dynamic thresholding. And then, of course, moving in Once you have that data, like we talked about, the noise reduction and event correlation. Sure, you can do that today, but you can do it better once you have all of the data to understand how it all interrelates. And then moving to the nirvana and the future of self-healing and integrated automation. So I won't go into the detail behind all of these. I believe the presentation is available for download, but these are the details behind each of those items that we're looking at as we move into these newer technologies like Resolve Insights that are available today. So now we're going to step into a short demonstration. Go ahead and share my screen here. And if someone could confirm that you are indeed seeing a topology map. Lindsay, could you confirm that we're seeing the topology map here? Oh, I think I just saw it show up.
Yes, we are seeing it.
Oh, perfect. Thanks, Mike. Great. So in all of those things we just talked about, we're going to do a brief demonstration just to kind of show how all those things come together in the Resolve Insights platform. So what I've got here is a topology map of our internal engineering infrastructure. So this encompasses engineering, QA, sales engineering, et cetera. What we're doing here is we have actually pointed it at ourselves to get this deep topology view. And then we're going to define applications. You see all the relationships between them now. Hypervisors, we've got networking equipment, we've got storage equipment, we've got the virtual machines, physical machines, et cetera. And then we're going to define what are those applications through that auto discovery and dependency mapping. So for instance, if I want to see my billing application, where does that sit within my infrastructure? By selecting billing, I can see now all the components of that particular infrastructure that are related to billing. And then, of course, I can do things like show me which ones have a high severity. I can also leverage in deeper into each one of the areas associated to the devices and take a look at that. One of the things we like to also touch on is the applications themselves. So when we do those auto discoveries to help populate the CMDBs and identify what those relationships are, here's a different application for self-service. And these are the independent components that make it up. And of course, I can hover over any of them to get to raw detail, important information such as host names and IP addresses and what it is, so I can understand these relationships and work my way into it. But we're also going to do an app flow view. And what this does is it gives us the ability to say which application is talking, what are the components of it, and what parts of that application are talking to other parts of it. So this is actually showing you what we've discovered in terms of each of these components and how they're speaking to each of the other components. So while it seems very simple, it's really understanding the traffic and understanding which components are being leveraged across it. So it's not just a holistic view over topology, but understanding the relationships between. Next, I want to show how we're doing that discovery in a dynamic point of view. I'll take this last one here and expand this one out. And this one happens to be for Zookeeper, but it's giving a bunch of different things in here. And what we're doing is showing you the traffic patterns and flows. As we've identified them and mapped them directly from the devices in real time, we're able to create this relationship showing how all of the traffic is stemming from one to the other. And you see multiple lines. We have multiple connections going in here. So these are some critical systems supporting the rest of this environment for this particular application. So from a dynamic point of view, I can quickly see all of that relationship and identify, where it's going, where it's coming from. I even have the port information to tell me those associations. So that's great. And now that's great data that can be re-leveraged and pushed to that CMDB, which can then further be leveraged for things like the incidents, changes, and eventually problem management. We mentioned the business point of view and how critical the business is from a CMDB perspective. Another view here of that data dependency and discovery is going to be the business point of view. If we step back into that billing application, I can see from a business perspective here, the infrastructure health, if there are any faults, alerts, tickets, change requests associated to it from this high level. And then, of course, I can drill into it, further getting detail for that, just that part of the application, which I may own as a business owner. And then, of course, all of the app flows, relationships, and components thereof. taking a look at it from an analytics perspective, moving into that prediction, the AIOps piece of this, we really see things like disk volume prediction, anomalies, and anomalies are an interesting thing. How do you identify something that shouldn't happen but did happen? You know things are going to fail. You know things are going to have problems. You have a good idea that certain Windows machines need to be rebooted at certain times. Certain Linux services need to be restarted periodically. But when you're outside of that norm and something goes odd, how I can then address it and predictively look at it to see if it's going to cause other issues. Then we're going to step into something like the noise reduction. So taking all of that information from all of the discovery, all of the applications, all of the dependencies that have been created, and as information comes in, and this looks very busy, what we're doing is we're correlating all that together and really applying some intelligence behind it to say, let's correlate all of these items and really bring it down to only the things that are of importance. And we call that clustering. So we're creating clusters of anything that may be active. You see there's a few cleared here, again, pointing towards our internal real infrastructure. So that's just a brief overview of some of the things that can be done that are in relation to what we've been talking to here today. I'll go ahead and stop sharing and talk about kind of where we sit within that whole Resolve infrastructure. We really just touched on a couple of these boxes that are in the center of the screen here, and I think that's the color aqua, really around the auto discovery and dependency and around the correlation and visualization. There's a lot more that Resolve does. Most of you know that, and around the automation, prediction, the AIOps, and all of those other things. Certainly can request more information on that after the presentation or at the end of the presentation. Now, with that, I think we're moving into QA.
So an accurate CMDB, though, sets that future, right, for some of the other Resolve Insights capabilities and being able to look at AIOps initiatives, your automations, all of those sort of things. Without an accurate CMDB, it's kind of hard to do those things. So again, the CMDB becomes that cornerstone, the center of the universe for really driving this next generation of capabilities. Is that a fair way to put that, Marcus?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's no launch pad without having the pad first. I really need to understand what the cornerstone is and having all those items there. So great way to put it. One quick question for you, Mike, on that, and I think I wanted to touch on this a little bit earlier, is we talked about all of this information and identifying the right way to look at it, identifying the correlations, relationships, the dependencies. Can the CMDB handle all that today?
So absolutely it can. When we start to look at a platform like Cherwell Service Management, we're not limited to just the out-of-the-box CI types. I gave the example of a customer creating a CI type for application, but CI types can be created for anything that as an organization you decide in your plan needs to be tracked and leveraged. And then the Resolve Insights platform allows us the ability to integrate that to our IT service management system, in this case, Cherwell Service Management, and pull that data over. So our CMDB is kept accurate by a system that is automatically doing our discovery, automatically collecting details on these CIs. And then in addition, as we build out those dependency maps and build out other dependencies, because it's one of the powers of the Resolve Insights tool, we can build other insights that we may want to have of our data. That data can also be synchronized into our Cherwell Service Management platform, as an example, to show those dependencies, the upstream and the downstream dependencies, and drive that knowledge to the CMDB. So a technician who's leveraging our CMDB within Cherwell has that picture, that ability, and with Cherwell's visualizations as an example, with the data that's collected and curated within Resolve Insights, we're able to share that data, synchronize that data, into our Cherwell CMDB, so a technician could actually see through a visualization that upstream and downstream relationship and mapping. They don't necessarily, everyone has to go to another tool to be able to do the core things they need to do, or change management as an example, being able to see what our potential impacts of that change are going to be based on the relationships that have been defined. So the platform and the tool set can work in concert with our Resolve Insights platform to really give us the best of both worlds.
Great. Awesome. Thank you for clearing that up. That's come up a couple of times in the past couple of weeks, so appreciate the detail. With that, I think we're moving to questions and answers, so I will turn this back over to Lindsay.
Yes. Absolutely. All right. Thank you guys so much. That was really, really informative. And I will take this moment to remind folks on the webinar to go ahead and submit your questions. So we have a number of great questions that have come in. I'll get to that in just a second, but there's still time to submit them. And if we don't get to answer your question, we will absolutely follow up afterwards and do so. I will also take this moment just to let folks know that once we wrap up here at the top of the hour, there's going to be a really, really brief survey that'll pop up, and we would really appreciate you taking about 30 seconds and just letting us know how you liked the webcast and what we could do to continue to bring you interesting material on future webcasts. So with that, questions. All right, so in the case of network gear, should I have a CI type for each type of device, like a switch, a router, etc., or should I combine them into one network device? What do you think, Marcus? You want to kick that off?
Sure. Great question. It depends. It depends on a couple of things. It depends on how your infrastructure is going to leverage it. It depends on how your company is going to use it, and it depends on how the business needs to see it. If it's just a networking device and no one needs to know more than that, sure, one CI type would be a lot cleaner way to do it, but you may not get the granularity that the organization may be looking for, especially if it takes down more than one application or more than one business service. So typically what I see is and recommend is starting small with a specific subset of those devices and then building them out on a per device basis as long as it makes sense. Now, if you only have, if you're a smaller or mid-sized organization and you only have a small subset of those, it doesn't make sense to break them out if you only have 2 or 3.
Yeah, and one of the examples in Cherwell Service Management, you may have a key field within your network device CI type that says, is this a router? Is this a switch? Is this a hub? That would be another method. But to your point, Marcus, it really depends, and that is part of what goes into your planning of how you're going to do this.
Exactly.
All right, next question. Initial asset discovery is always a big challenge, especially in a legacy environment. Can you discuss the typical issues encountered during the first discovery and how to overcome those? Great question. Who wants to jump on that?
I'll go ahead and start off, Mike, and maybe you can help fill in some blanks. It is a huge challenge, especially when you get into those legacy devices. I think the first thing, going back to the constant theme here, is identification of what it is that's important to you guys for the CMDB and important to the business, as well as to what the CMDB is going to be leveraged for. In a legacy environment, there just flat out are some things that you're going to have to manually capture. I can think of mainframes. I can think of anybody that's still running some AS400s out there. There's a few other things lying around that may have to be captured manually. But typical issues encountered in a first discovery are going to be the ones that you identify that you need to do manually, and then understanding that you're going to have to negotiate with different groups that have the ownership of those things, where you're going to need to get them to provide you the information to go ahead and go discover that part of the environment. So there's definitely some credentials. There's definitely some communication that has to happen, because no one has the holistic view if everyone maintains the smaller fiefdoms. Mike, anything to add to that?
I would agree. The initial pass is always the challenge. So where are your trouble spots And I look at the other things that you need to deal with in some environments. They could have multiple layers of firewalls, and so how are we going to get through the different layers of which to discover everything? Sometimes there's a map for that. There's a plan, and sometimes you have to build the plan. So each one's going to be a little bit unique, but definitely it's doable.
Absolutely. Great question again.
All right. Yeah, no, really great questions rolling in here. So next up, Marcus, can you tell us, does Resolve ingest data like logs, events, monitoring from other systems, or does it collect data natively, or both? And what tools are required to get started?
Great question. So Insights has been designed to be a single viewpoint, a single pane, if you will. I don't like to use the term single pane of glass, but the intent was that, yes, we can absolutely ingest those logs. We can absolutely ingest that data from other event management tools and other application-specific tools that are going to a layer deeper of discovery of the application relationships. So the goal is to really take that information, collate it, correlate it, put it all together, and then do the CMDB updates, but also allow for that management view for things like events, event management control issues, and of course it provides data for things like the prediction as well.
All right. So can you chat a little bit more about Resolve's event correlation capabilities and how exactly that works with Sharewell?
Yes, so event correlation is specific to the event management piece of it. So Resolve is doing its own event management in addition to taking those logs and event feeds from the other systems. The correlation is really going to be the intelligent part that's going to leverage all of that information and say, I understand the relationship, so I know that this particular network gear, router, switch could have been the item that's affecting all of this. But once I identify the relationships and I know for sure, I can correlate all of those things that are alarming down to the one particular device. Conversely, it could be a single database that's affecting multiple applications because that database happens to, while it's a database server, it may house multiple databases supporting different applications. So I can see the upstream effects of what's going to happen there. And the correlation is designed to take all of that information for the dependencies and correlate it down to what's most important and most likely going to be the issue that needs to be addressed.
Now, Marcus said, as those things are correlated and identified, can we then leverage the Insights transactional portions to go ahead and go out to, say, for example, your Sharewell platform and create an incident because of that?
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. Great question. And yes, so the short answer is we can leverage the automation piece to go do the work, but we're also going to provide that data back into Sharewell, and we can do things like launch the change request, or in this case, it could be an emergency change request, in which case we're already going to begin the work, but we're just going to capture it. And then ultimately, Sharewell is going to provide the point of view for all of that reporting that's going to give people insight into what's failing when, so that they can see not only the CMDB information, but the incidents, the changes, and the problems that are all potentially associated to a CI or group of CIs to then allow for better planning in the future. Great point.
All righty. So can we integrate the auto discovery with ServiceNow?
We absolutely can, yes. We'll leave it there since we're focused on Sharewell today. But yes, we integrate with a variety of other IT service management systems, including ServiceNow.
All right, great. All right, so I think this is going to be our last question. So again, if we haven't gotten to your questions, really great questions coming in, we'll definitely follow up and be happy to go into some more detail. Now, can you discuss some efficient ways to measure the accuracy of the CMDB?
Oh, Mike, that one's all yours.
So one of the methods, when you're able to use a powerful discovery platform like a Resolve Insights, one of the ways that we've used to measure accuracy is we're tying that in so we know when was the last time that that particular CI was reported in by our discovery platform? And once stuff starts to age, then you've got to start to ask some questions. Well, wait a minute, what happened to this particular item? It doesn't seem to be getting seen anymore. And that can happen for a number of different reasons. Marcus, as you noted, in some of the legacy devices, maybe somebody went in and changed the password that's being used, or they've locked it down and we just see a device, but we don't know what it is. And so that starts to help us understand if things start to age and we're not getting new data, we need to start asking questions about that. It so often happens in CMDBs that maybe a device is deprecated and people forget to deprecate it within the CMDB. Well, if it ages a little bit, then that question can be asked. Oh yeah, we turned that, we shut that server down, last month. Okay, well, somebody didn't update the CMDB. We can now make sure it goes and gets updated. So in being able to leverage a very, very powerful platform like Resolve Insights, it gives you that ability to kind of mark those things as, somebody needs to look at this. That's one method of which to do that.
All right, fantastic. Well, that is all that we have time for today. I know we could all go on and talk about CMDBs for the whole rest of the day, I think, and more. So again, we'll be following up with folks who have asked questions and we haven't gotten to yet. And please take a moment to fill out the survey that will pop up on your screen in just a minute. And thank you so much for everybody for joining us today. Hope to see you again soon.
Thanks, everyone.